We mentioned last time that after the death of the Emperor Charlemagne, his great empire covering most of continental Western Europe, except for Spain, was divided up among his sons, and the organization and cultural renaissance that Charlemagne had brought rather quickly deteriorates. In the year 911, Charlemagne's line comes to an end, and at this time, throughout this time also, as we mentioned already, there were the continual invasions of the Vikings and the Saracens, as the Muslims were called, Hungarians, other tribes. And so the organization of society that historians call the feudal system became the order of the day in Western Europe, in what we would know as France and Germany and northern Italy. The feudal system is based on mutual protection. The weaker person pledges loyalty or fealty and support to the greater, who is the Lord, so he becomes the vassal of the Lord, and there is an agreement there of mutual protection. The Lord will protect the vassal, and the vassal will provide support and assistance to the Lord. So everybody, except for the poor serfs who are tied to the land and simply must work for whoever is the local landowner, everybody else who would be, in our way of speaking, free, is in one form or other somebody's lord or somebody's vassal, from the lowest to the highest, to the king. And this includes even, as we're going to see, even people who have positions within the church. Now, the result of the feudal system as it affected the church is that almost the entire government of the church becomes controlled by the feudal lord and is no longer in the hands of the bishops and the priests. And it is from this period, particularly the 10th century in Western Europe, is a very dark period insofar as that sin which had tormented the church from the beginning, the sin of simony, which is the buying and selling of church positions and the sacraments. It's called simony from the name Simon Magus in the Acts of the Apostles, who was envious of the Apostle Peter's gifts of healing and wanted to buy them with money. And Peter curses him, saying, "Your silver and gold perish with you." But this name is given, of course, this selling of church positions, whether it's a pastor of parishes, even bishoprics, is condemned in every church council imaginable. But that didn't help the 10th century. It becomes the order of the day. As a result, the level of the clergy in general sinks, in the West, sinks to one of its all-time lows. There are other bad periods, but this is a particularly bad one. There is no system in place for the education of the clergy. Often the bishop himself in a given place is someone who has no sign of piety or knowledge of the faith, but simply has had that position bought for him. Priests border sometimes on illiteracy. There are descriptions from this time. Of course, one can also find good and saintly bishops, as one can in every period of the church's history. But one finds really shocking descriptions of how one priest has to be disciplined because he does not even know the words of baptism. Things such as this. I want to read to you a short description of it's kind of notorious description of how common this buying and selling of church positions became. And this is written in the first person. It's written by one Berengar, who is the Count of Narbonne, a city in France. When my uncle, the Archbishop of Narbonne, died, Count Wilfrid of Cerdana, to whom my wife was related, came to Narbonne and approached both my parents and myself to obtain the archbishopric for his son, who was only 10 years old at the time. And he offered a great gift of 100,000 solidi, gold coins, to my father. We then gave it, that is, gave the archbishopric to Wilfrid's son, and he was enthroned in the cathedral. So that means that this child is made an archbishop, and grew in years. But then, arrogant as a devil, he unexpectedly provoked me to anger and harassed me and built castles against me and made cruel war on me with a vast army. And then a commentary, that's the end of the first-hand description. Significantly, the father of the young archbishop in question also succeeded in providing for his 4 remaining sons. All the other sons actually became bishops as well, and all from the positions being bought. So there was this tremendous trafficking in money. And along with it, I think it can be safely said that the level of the morality of the clergy sunk proportionally with the growth of simony. One hears of all sorts of unchastity, concubinage. So the church in the 10th century has to face this terrible situation that has come on it as a result of this system of the feudal lords setting themselves up as not only protectors of the church, but really owners of all the church's property and offices. And this expression is frequently described in the history books as the investiture controversy. It's called that because even when someone was made a bishop during this period, it became more and more the case, till finally it was universal in the West, that not only was the liturgical service of ordination done, but being ordained a bishop didn't mean that you could function as bishop until you received what in the West were the signs of the bishop's office, the bishop's staff, and the bishop's ring, not from the other bishops, not from anybody who has authority in the church's succession, but from the feudal lord, from whom you had most likely, not 100% of the time, most likely bought them, or they had been bought for you. And when the feudal lord gave the ring and the staff, or in the case of a parish priest, declared that this particular man was the pastor of a given church, and the churches at this time, because society had so disintegrated from the system of cities and villages, rather it was the manors, and so the church was really the chapel of the Lord of the Manor, and he would be the one that would say to the new bishop or the new priest, receive this church, see, as if it was his to give. So you have a system of church offices being completely under what would be called lay ownership and control, and that's what what we're going to talk about shortly, the investiture controversy, is all about. Now, this time, in the 10th century, not only is the life of the Western Church in general on this level, in any event, at its low ebb, it also affects the papacy itself, so that the papacy is bought and sold and handed back and forth because the nobles in the city of Rome are quarreling. They're all divided into various families and parties. They all have their own candidate. Whoever's stronger, whoever has the most money to pay for it, gets it. And so, for example, in the 150 years from 900 to 1050, there are 35 popes. That's a lot of popes for 150 years. So the average tenure in the papal office is 4 years. So that's how bad it is, and that's what the church has to face. I bring this up because we're going to be speaking now of what is called a reform movement in the Western Church to throw off this system of lay control. But unfortunately, as we're going to see, what happens to throw off lay control is the Pope begins to act as and be understood as an absolute monarch who has complete authority. Not only, if you recall from last time, Pope Nicholas I, just in the generation just previous to these terrible events of the 10th century, claimed that he had authority over all the bishops. But in the time to come, the Pope is going to claim to have even more authority than over the bishops, but actually is going to set himself up as a kind of world ruler. In the year 936, an emperor is declared again in what would be known as Germany today. All of this disintegration into among various peoples, Bavarians, Swabians, Saxons, Burgundians, is united in one loose empire again under Otto I. And several years later, in the year 962, the Emperor Otto is crowned in Rome, just as Charlemagne had been a century and a half ago. And he, of course, the Emperor Otto, is a product of this system in which all of the offices of the church are at the disposal of the appropriate feudal lord. So now that he has been crowned emperor in Rome, he sees the papacy is at his disposal as well. So he decrees 1 year after being crowned in Rome that anybody who is going to be elected pope has to be confirmed by him. The emperor confirms the election of the pope. And to show that he indeed will have the authority to do this, he deposes by his authority as emperor the present pope and confirms a new one. So the traditional election of the Pope by the clergy and the people of Rome, and by the way, that was the typical way in which a bishop was elected. When bishop died, the clergy and the people of the city assembled together, sometimes relatively peacefully and sometimes quite violently, and elected a successor. And then the man who was elected would go to the bishops of the church in that area to have the election confirmed. It wasn't simply a democratic election because he was being given the apostolic office. The election had to be confirmed by the other bishops, and then he would be ordained in his cathedral by the bishops of the area. But with the Emperor Otto, something is added to this. No longer is it the election by the clergy and people of Rome for the Pope. No longer is he consecrated bishop by the area bishops. But the election has to be confirmed by him. So what's happened is, in the midst of this time where, and he, by the way, thinks that he is doing the church some good by doing this. He doesn't see himself as the enemy of the church at all. He is taking the control of the papacy in his way of looking at it, away from the warring Roman nobles and putting it in his own hands, the German emperor, and at least hoping that there will be an increase of law and order. So this is the system that prevails in Rome then for the next best part of the century. And we're going to get back to that shortly. After we speak of the beginnings of the desire to completely end this system of lay control of church offices and properties, and it begins not in the city, not with bishops and not with princes, but it begins in a monastery in France, in a town called Cluny. And the monastery in Cluny becomes the center of a monastic renewal in which the monasteries, which also have been at the disposal of the feudal lords, declare themselves, at least the monasteries that are in this family of the monastery of Cluny, and then it becomes very popular to do so. The monasteries declare themselves to be completely independent of control either by feudal lords or bishops. They don't want to have anything to do with either. They say that we are directly under the authority of the Pope. Cluny was a monastery in France. Ordinarily, a monastery is like anything else that exists within a diocese of the church. It's under the oversight of the local bishop. But the monastery of Cluny says, no, we are going to reform our own interior monastic life. And indeed they did. It became a kind of monastic army there in Cluny. It's said that one could hear the singing, the monks of Cluny singing the services for miles away. So many of them were there. And we will acknowledge only the authority of the Pope. So it's the first time that the monks begin to desire to throw off this lay control. And this monastic movement of Cluny, and especially under the great Abbot Odilo, and that spurs more monastic revival through other parts of Europe along the same lines. This renewal of ascetic life, and there are some great ascetical saints of this time in the West that begin new expressions of Western monasticism. Saint Romuald, who begins the Camaldolese hermits. Saint Bruno, who begins the what could be said to be the most ascetic of all the Western monks, the Carthusians. The Carthusians live as hermits. They each have a little cell, and they come together only for the services every day, only for the principal services, for Matins and Vespers and the celebration of the Eucharist. The rest of their prayers they do alone. They eat together only on great feasts. The rest of the time they eat alone. They have an almost perpetual practice of silence. And it's mitigated by every week, if you're a Carthusian monk, you go for a walk with another brother in the monastery for several hours, during which you can speak. And it's somebody different every time. So in a given period of time, everybody has a walk with everybody. But that's all the speaking that's done in a Carthusian monastery. And in fact, they are the only Western monastic order who to this day has never needed any kind of renewal, never needed any kind of cleaning out and going back to the original purpose of the monastic life. They have stayed pretty much purely in their extremely ascetical tradition. They even have now a kind of Carthusian motto in Latin, numquam reformator, numquam deformator. Nothing changed, therefore nothing deformed. So there is only, in the United States, there's only one monastery of Carthusian monks in the state of Vermont. It's never been a huge monastic order because of its extremely ascetical life. But if, in one sense, if one wants to see Western Christianity lived as it was lived in the tradition of the Western Church even before the division, one can go visit the Carthusians, who even keep almost exactly the same fasts as the Orthodox do now, to show this common life. Anyhow, so there are these ascetical and organizational reforms that come first from monastic sources, and these monastic reform movements produce many of the central figures of the 11th century that bring about this transformation of the papacy, because it also must be said that the Cluniac monks, in throwing off the power of lay control, do not throw it off quite in the spirit, for example, of Saint Theodosius of the Caves, who wanted to have no power at all simply be a poor imitator of Christ's passion. Rather, they wanted to directly exercise the power of the church in this world for what they thought were good reasons, in order to bring back the society of their times from this disintegration. And they thought that the only way that that could be done was for them to have power themselves, not only what we would call spiritual authority, but temporal power, and not be interfered with by anybody else. So, in the 11th century then, we have finally the end of this 150-year period in fact, it's sometimes by some church historians, this 150 years of the 30 popes called the pornocracy. So low had the papal office sunk in the people that occupied it during this time. We have the end of it by the election of Pope Leo IX, who is a product not of the old Roman Church, but is the first of the German popes. And of course, at the beginning, his election has to be confirmed by the emperor, but the emperor is at this time a pious man, not wanting to interfere with the life of the church. And Leo IX institutes sweeping reforms in the Roman Church. First of all, he establishes an institution that most people are familiar with to this day, the College of Cardinals in its present form. Now, the title cardinal is an ancient title in the Roman Church, even from before Constantine, coming from the earliest days of the organization of the Roman Church. The city of Rome was divided into sections, and each one of these sections had a principal church. Cardinalis, meaning a principal church. And so the priest of this principal church was called the cardinal, a sort of archpriest. It seems that in the beginning, these principal churches were used for especially important functions, namely baptism. We are accustomed in these days to baptism being done anywhere and at any time when it needs to be done. But in the early church, both East and West, baptism was done only in certain places and only at certain times. And so the principal churches of Rome were reserved for baptisms. And likewise, the Church of Rome was divided into sections among the deacons for the distribution of the church charity, and the head deacon in each section was called the cardinal deacon. And likewise, when more and more the area surrounding Rome, the suburban area, came into the church and had its own suburban bishops, and these bishops also were part of the structure of the Roman Church, because the suburban cities very much related to Rome. Those bishops were called the cardinal bishops. So when a new pope had to be elected, all of these local clergy, cardinal priests and deacons and bishops, got together, and together with the people, they elected the new pope. That's how it was to work ideally. We see what happened to it once it got into the control of the warring noble families of Rome, and then into the hands of the German emperor. But it was a very local affair, the College of Cardinals. Well, in comes Pope Leo IX, and he turns it inside out. He appoints as cardinals all the leading reforming bishops and priests that he knows from Germany, from France, from anywhere, and gives them the key positions in the Church of Rome. So it's the first expansion of the College of Cardinals into what in the Roman Church has become now an international expression, rather than being simply the local clergy of the Church of Rome, who had at this time pretty much all obtained their offices by buying them. Leo IX appoints people who are like him in their desire to completely cast off the control of the emperor and the feudal lords over the church. Now, two of the people that Leo appoints as his most trusted advisors are two men named Humbert, Cardinal Humbert, and a man named Hildebrand from Germany. And Hildebrand is going to become, a generation later, the greatest of what's called the reforming popes, reforming within the context of this reform of the 11th century, Pope Gregory VII. Now, here is an example of the transformation that has come to the papacy. That in order to declare itself independent of control by secular forces, these papal reformers have decided that the papacy must have all spiritual and worldly authority completely in the hands of the papacy. And I want to read to you, I hope I have it here. Yeah, here it is. Here is a series of statements that's called the Dictatus Papae, meaning the declarations regarding the Pope, declarations of the popes. It is an anonymous series of little descriptions of the papal office. Some have thought that Cardinal Humbert is the author of it, but probably not. And before I read this, it's important for me to stress, because if you've never heard this before, it will open your eyes and shock you even a little bit. That's why it's necessary and only fair to say that at no time have these statements been understood as a dogmatic declaration of the Roman Catholic Church regarding the papal office. And there have been and are faithful Roman Catholic teachers who would regard many of these statements as exaggerated and excessive. However, they very much express what people like Pope Leo IX and his advisors, Cardinal Humbert and Hildebrand, who is going to eventually succeed him, how they regard themselves. So here are these statements. That the Roman Church was founded by God alone. That the Roman Pontiff alone is rightly to be called universal or ecumenical. They never liked bishops in the other big cities using the title ecumenical, especially Constantinople. That he alone can depose or reinstate bishops. Of course, that's directed primarily to getting rid of the control by the feudal lords. It's not directly intended to be an attack on other bishops in other parts of the church. That his legate, even if of lower grade, takes precedence in a council of all bishops and may render a sentence of deposition against them. Now here's something new. That means that the representative of the Pope of Rome in a council of the church, and we know that the legates of the Pope of Rome have been at all councils, and their presence has been considered very, very important. Nevertheless, now the claim is made that even if this legate is a priest, which they frequently were, in virtue of his being the legate of the Pope, he outranks everybody. That means he outranks the patriarchs of Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, Jerusalem, anybody. And he can depose all of them if he wants to. That for the Pope alone it is lawful to enact new laws according to the needs of the time, to assemble together new congregations, to establish monasteries, or to divide rich dioceses and unite the poor ones. That he alone may use the imperial insignia. So he can use, the Pope can begin to use the imperial crown. That the Pope is the only one whose feet are to be kissed by all princes. Now, the act of homage, not in the presence of a bishop, but in the presence of the emperor, of making a prostration and kissing the slipper. That was common in this time. But here the Pope is claiming that he gets that too. If the emperor, if all the subjects of the emperor are to, if they're in the emperor's presence, to prostrate and kiss the emperor's foot, the emperor is to kiss the Pope, to be kissed by all princes. That his title is unique in the world, that he may depose emperors, that no council may be called a general council without his order, that no book may be regarded as canonical without his authority, that he himself may be judged by no one, that to this see, meaning the Roman see, the more important cases of every church should be submitted, that the Roman Church has never erred, nor ever by the witness of Scripture shall err to all eternity, that the Roman Pontiff, if canonically ordained, is undoubtedly sanctified by the merits of St. Peter, that he should not be considered as Catholic who is not in conformity with the Roman Church. Now this last one, it's interesting. That has been said before, and not by people from the West. It's been said by, for example, both Maximus the Confessor and St. Theodore the Studite, when they appealed to the Pope, as was the tradition, to appeal to him as arbiter in cases of the faith. They said, because he is the first bishop of the church, and because he faithfully professes the entire faith of the church, you must be in communion with him. That's the context. But here there is no criterion at all except that he is who he is. And his position is guaranteed by God alone and can be judged by no one. And this particular printing of the list is, by the way, if you want to read in detail, I think the best book currently available about this period and the period following the estrangement between East and West, I recommend this book by Aristides Papadakis and Father John Meyendorff, The Christian East and the Rise of the Papacy. Very good. And so Professor Papadakis comments after this, considering the shadowy status of the papacy before 1046, the forceful and outspoken character of these claims is remarkable. Which it is. Now, this is how Pope Leo IX and his successors, the new German popes, that have not only declared themselves independent of the German emperor, but have set themselves up now as in fact the universal emperor, not only universal bishop but universal emperor with the authority to depose kings. This is how they look upon themselves, and now we have to see what's going to happen when that understanding of the papacy is applied to areas outside the West. Oh. Well, in the 11th century, we have some trouble going on in the form of the Normans. Now, who are the Normans? The Normans are the descendants of the Vikings who came and settled in the area of northwest France that we call now Normandy, and they intermarried with the local population. And so a couple generations removed, they're no longer Scandinavian Vikings, but now they're the Norman French, but they preserve the tradition of conquering anything that they can get their hands on. And so they're traveling all around the Mediterranean world, mainly trying to fight off Muslims, it's true, but also taking over areas that had previously been part of the Empire of Constantinople, namely Sicily and southern Italy, and then eventually some of the Western Greek islands, Cyprus. So they run into conflict particularly in Sicily and southern Italy, with the local Christians there, who are primarily Greek-speaking. Southern Italy and Sicily are primarily Greek-speaking areas at this time. And so, of course, the church as it's established there is the Greek church. And here come the Norman conquerors, who in the case of Sicily drive out the Muslims, which is considered a good thing. In the case of southern Italy, because they're greedy for territory, take over states over which the Pope claims to have not only ecclesiastical but also secular jurisdiction. So not even the Pope so much likes the Normans there, but nevertheless they set themselves up there, and they bring the Latin church, the Latin liturgy, with the Filioque sung in the Creed. The Filioque has been sung for the first time in Rome. Remember, we said last time that Pope Leo III, it only took a century to go from Pope Leo III to Pope Leo IX, all those popes. Pope Leo III would have nothing to do with the use of the Filioque in the 9th century, but by the time of the 10th, by the time of the 11th, in the year 1014, the Filioque is sung for the first time in Rome, and they begin to completely ignore the Greek bishops in southern Italy and Sicily and set up their own church jurisdictions. And eventually they interfere with the life of the native church, the native Greek church of that area. And so the Greek Christians in that area, they complain not only to the Pope, but they complain to the person most logical for them to complain to, and that's the Patriarch in Constantinople, a man by the name of Michael Cerularius. And when Michael Cerularius hears that the Normans are interfering with the life of what he considers to be his churches, and furthermore are celebrating the liturgy with the Filioque and unleavened bread, Michael Cerularius had a particular dislike for the practice of the use of unleavened bread. Whenever he denounces anything bad that the West does, that always heads the list. And as we said last time, that only became common in the Western Church about 100 years previous to this. So when it comes to the ears of the Greek bishops, it does indeed sound as a shocking novelty. But so his response, Michael Cerularius not being a gentle man, unfortunately, when he hears that the local Greek churches in southern Italy and Sicily are being harassed and some of them closed, says, well then, I'm going to close all of the Latin churches in Constantinople and the surrounding area. See, there were Western Europeans that lived in Constantinople for various reasons, and they had their own. They were permitted to have their own Latin churches and Latin liturgy, but Patriarch Michael, in retaliation for what the Normans are doing in southern Italy, closes down the Latin churches, which was a nasty thing to do. He had the authority to do it, but it of course was the cause of the unfortunate incident of 1054, because when Pope Leo hears of what's happened, he sends his legate, his ambassador, to Constantinople. And who does he send but Cardinal Humbert, who particularly exemplifies all of those claims regarding the Roman Church that we have read. And so Cardinal Humbert does not go to Constantinople to enter into a dialogue, to try to work it out, to try to compromise, to try to come to an agreement. He goes to Constantinople to assert the universal authority of the Roman Pope, of which he is of whom he is the representative, and as the representative, he has greater authority than the Patriarch of Constantinople in his own estimation. Well, he gets to Constantinople, and of course, the Patriarch will have nothing to do with him. And as a result, Cardinal Humbert writes a decree of excommunication. And he excommunicates Patriarch Michael and all those who agree with him. and he puts it on the altar in the great cathedral of Hagia Sophia, and leaves the church, being very dramatic, shaking the dust off his feet and saying, "Let God see and judge." And the deacon in the meantime begging him not to do it and take it back. And in response to that, Patriarch Michael excommunicates Cardinal Humbert. So that's what happens in the year 1054. You see, often 1054 is dated as the official beginning of the schism between the Greek and Latin churches. But what actually happened is that Cardinal Humbert excommunicated the Patriarch and his followers without specifying who they were, and the Patriarch excommunicated Cardinal Humbert in return. There was not a mutual excommunication of both churches. Now, it is true that from this time, the names of the popes of Rome were no longer commemorated liturgically in Constantinople. But they were seldom commemorated during the whole century and a half before, because there were so many of them that they got tired in Constantinople of hearing that there was yet another new pope. So they stopped commemorating the pope altogether most of the time, not knowing who he was. So, but for example, one must not think that some huge lead curtain descended between East and West in the year 1054, and from that time the Greek Christians and the Latin Christians regarded themselves as members of two distinct churches. It simply was not the case. This incident hadn't even affected beyond the Pope and the Patriarch and a few bishops. People didn't even know that it had happened. And for example, when Western Christians went east to Jerusalem, to the holy places, or to Constantinople, or vice versa, they would go to the liturgy in the local churches. They would receive the sacraments in the local churches. There wasn't. We in America are so used to an atmosphere of denominationalism, of every church having their own sign outside telling what flavor it is. Well, such a mentality was completely absent in the 11th century. There wasn't any notion that now there is a Greek Orthodox church and now there is a Roman Catholic church. That was going to come, but it's not going to come for a while. So we have this incident which, to give it the attention that it's due, is a widening. It's an incident that represents a widening of the estrangement between East and West. By the time Cardinal Humbert gets back to Rome, Pope Leo IX has died anyway. So because the Pope is dead, any decision that Cardinal Humbert made in his name as legate is null and void, you see. So in the meantime, back in the West, a few popes after Leo IX, this second of his most central counselors, Hildebrand, becomes Pope Gregory VII. And he is the one that is to bring this reform of the papacy into a world ruler, completely casting off any influence of what we would call the state to its height. And he enters into this great controversy with the German emperor, Henry IV, again over the investiture of bishops. And the question is it going to be permitted for the feudal lord, whether it's the king or the landowner, to present the bishop with the signs of his office, to declare that the church is handed over to him? And Pope Gregory is determined to end this once and for all, because he sees it as the source of so much of the trouble in the church. And within that framework, of course, he's correct. The question that needs to be asked is the method he used, assuming to himself the authority of a world leader, was that the method to fight it? That's the big question. Well, the Pope who forbids that he puts an end to this investiture of bishops by the feudal lords. He declares it to be an offense worthy of excommunication. The Emperor Henry IV completely ignores it and goes on doing it anyway. So the Pope excommunicates the Emperor. And Emperor Henry, who is suffering back at home in Germany because he doesn't have total support from all the German princes and states, and now that the Pope has excommunicated him, some of his enemies use that as the excuse to increase opposition against him. Emperor Henry sees that he has to repent. So he goes to the Pope's winter residence at Canossa and asks to be absolved from his sin of investing bishops and rebelling against the Pope. And Gregory is not convinced of his sincerity in the least, but nevertheless grants him absolution. But this incident of the emperor humbling himself before the Pope is frequently presented in what I would regard as oversimplified descriptions of this clash between the church and the state, as the church completely humbling the emperor, and even the expression going to Canossa, as Emperor Henry IV went to Canossa. A story is told that doesn't seem to be true, that he had to spend days kneeling in the snow before the Pope would absolve him, but that doesn't seem to have happened. Then, after this, the trouble brews up again, and this time, and the Pope excommunicates Emperor Henry a second time. But this time, Henry has consolidated his forces up in Germany, and the Pope, Gregory VII, is driven from Rome into exile, and dies in exile. His last words are, "I have loved righteousness and hated iniquity, therefore I die in exile." So this, nevertheless, even though this battle was lost in the defeat of Pope Gregory by Emperor Henry, nevertheless the war was won. And from then on, the power of the Holy Roman Emperor in the West and the feudal lords over the church offices was for the most part broken, and it was broken at the price of the Pope setting himself up as the universal ruler, not only of the church but also of the state, having authority, a political authority even greater than the emperor or the king, and absolute authority over the universal church. And this is what was rejected by St. Photius. This was what was rejected in a rougher form by Patriarch Michael, and this is what will continue to be rejected in an increasingly intense manner by the Eastern churches. And we'll close this evening by speaking of the second very tragic event that brings the 11th century to a close, and that is that on the eastern borders of the Greek Empire, the migrating Turkish tribes are pressing more and more in, and they want lands to settle. And this first group of Turks, called the Seljuk Turks, there's a great battle that's fought in the year 1071 at the town of Manzikert, which is in what would today be eastern Turkey. And the Byzantine army, the mighty Byzantine army, is completely routed by the Turkish forces. And the significance of this event cannot be exaggerated, because as a result of it, most of Asia Minor was lost to the Turks. We're so used, when we think of the maps now, of thinking of Asia Minor as Turkey. You must remember that for so long it was the heartland of the church. Think of the names of the cities that are there: Ephesus, Smyrna, all of the names of the churches of the book of Revelation. Cappadocia, where the area where the great fathers of the church came from. Asia Minor was the stronghold of the church for the first millennium of the church's existence. And now, except for the very western part of it, it's overrun by Turkish tribes who increasingly oppress and eventually end any Greek rule there. And they advance as far as to Nicaea, not even 100 miles away from the city of Constantinople. So even though the Eastern Roman Empire is going to continue for another slightly under 4 centuries, nevertheless, this is the beginning of the end at the Battle of Manzikert. This is the beginning of what's going to be finally the total Turkish conquering of the Eastern Roman Empire. And from now on, after having this period of flowering in the 10th and 11th century, from now on the level of, on the political, this worldly level, it's going to be always, what's left of the empire is always going to be on the defense against the Turks. And it's also important to realize that all of the negotiations that are going to go on between East and West, and we'll talk of them in the next couple weeks, the attempt to heal the increasing breach between Greek and Latin churches, they're always going to be colored by the desperate need of the emperor in Constantinople for military help from the West to keep the Turks at bay. So with that, we'll close. And we can have some questions now. Yes.
When you have situations like 10-year-old archbishops, or if you take another example of a bishop that is genuinely in apostolic succession and then apostates, does apostolic succession apply to the person or the office?
The church has consistently taught, and as expressed in the canons of the ecumenical councils, that the apostolic succession lies in the office. Therefore, if the candidate, even though he is unworthy of the office, is canonically ordained, he bears the office. Now, a 10-year-old boy cannot be archbishop. So that ordination was null and void, even though they went through all the motions of it. But it's completely uncanonical, but was not uncommon at the time, all these excesses. But that leads to a question regarding the sacraments in general. Does the grace of the sacraments depend on the ministers who perform them? And that's not only a question of the church of this time, but that's what's behind even the controversies that resulted at the end of the Roman persecutions. Were bishops, for example, who had compromised, handed over the scriptures or the church vessels or some such like thing. Some claimed that that by this compromise they had forfeited grace. They were without grace, and therefore the heretics, the Donatist heretics and the other extreme rigorists who left the communion of the church over this question said that the efficacy of the sacraments depends on the worthiness of those who administer them. But the church has always said, no, that cannot be. The efficacy of the sacraments comes from God. And the human ministers that God uses for the sacraments are called to be worthy of that office, and woe to them eternally if they are not. But to say that the grace of salvation which God gives the church is made of no effect through the unworthiness of priests or bishops is to deny that what keeps the church going is the grace of God and not human energy. See, that's what's behind it. So the grace is in the office. Mm-hmm.
Maybe I misunderstand apostolic succession. I thought if you had to lay on the hands of a successor, upon you, they haven't come down from, Peter and Paul. So how does that fit in?
Oh, they had that. Even this 10-year-old boy was ordained by the local bishops, and then handed his staff and ring by the feudal lord and declared to be the bishop. But and so you can say, well, this is in a totally unworthy and unbefitting manner, uncanonical manner, wildly so. Yet nevertheless, if the bishops who ordain, and in the case of the 10-year-old boy, he couldn't be ordained, and so any attempt to ordain him is impossible. But in the case of someone who, let's say, is an immoral man, who has obtained the position by buying it or having it bought for him, so he's unworthy to be bishop. Nevertheless, he is canonically ordained by those who have received the apostolic laying of hands, and they confer it on to him. He nevertheless receives it. It's going to be, if he does not repent, to his damnation. And it's also going to be to the damnation of those who confer it, knowing his unworthiness. But nevertheless, the it in it, the apostolic authority in the church is given. The church has taught that without compromise. It has to, and so I hope you see why it has to be that way. Otherwise, the church is merely a human institution. A good parallel is to look at, for example, what goes on in the Old Covenant in Israel, when there's all sorts of similar atrocities and idolatries going on in the temple itself. Does the temple stop being the temple? Does the priesthood stop being the priesthood? No, even when it's in the hands of utterly unworthy men. It becomes their judgment and their condemnation, but they're still the priests of the God of Israel. And the liturgy that they unworthily offer is the true worship commanded by the God of Israel. Same thing in the New Covenant. The Essenes, at the time of Christ, they were, you may have heard of them, they were these ascetics who went off, lived by the Dead Sea, and wouldn't have anything to do with the temple because they said the temple was utterly filthy and polluted by the unworthy priests. It's not to them that the Messiah came. See, it's not to them that the promises were kept. It was to the stained, compromised priesthood of Jerusalem that the Messiah came, because that's to whom it was promised, and God's promises are kept because it is God's people and God's covenant, no matter what's done on the human side of it. That's what's being safeguarded in that teaching of the church. Right. There isn't a specific time when the event happened.
There isn't a specific time, but there had to be a time when the split occurred.
Rather, and we'll be talking about this the next couple times, it's more accurate, I think, to say that there were a number of times when it was impossible to deny that a division exists. When any attempt to, when false or compromised attempts to heal a division that was acknowledged failed. But as far as nailing down a date for the schism between East and West, you can't do it.
Not even on a local level?
No. It's too slippery a creature.
Even at a certain point when a bishop would say, we're no longer in communion with the Latin Church, would it not be final even at that point?
Yes, but you cannot find one time when for the entire church that's said. It happens gradually, and its effects are kind of like ripples. And in some places it has more effect, some places less.
But at the point where the Patriarch excommunicated the Pope...
But he didn't excommunicate the whole Latin Church.
He just excommunicated...
One person.
Oh, I
See, that's, if I didn't make that clear, that needs to be perfectly clear. In 1054, 1, 2, 3 people were excommunicated. Two people by the Patriarch, Cardinal Humbert and the other guy with him, whose name I forget. And
what's this recension that it's all about, where they were supposedly the East and the West rescinded those?
well, that's a good question. That back in the 60s, in an ecumenical, what was intended to be a visible ecumenical gesture, Pope Paul VI and Patriarch Athenagoras declared that there was a lifting of the anathemas, without being specific as to what kind of anathemas were being lifted. They were referring to the events of 1054, but they were actually superimposing upon the events of 1054 a significance that they did not have at the time. That's why, in my opinion, it was an empty gesture. And dangerous gesture also, because on the one hand, everybody knows who the Roman Pope is, because of his claims concerning the nature, the claims of the Roman Catholic Church since this time till now, concerning the nature of the office of the papacy. Everybody knows who the Pope is. But most people regarded this meeting of Paul VI and Athenagoras as the meeting of the Latin Pope and the Greek Pope, as it were. There is no such thing in the Eastern Church. There is no equivalent of the Pope in the Eastern Church. It's misleading. And the lifting, now their gesture was supposedly to lift this since only a couple people were involved in 1054, I suppose since only a couple people were involved in this gesture, it was supposed to balance it out some way. But it was not declaring an end to the schism. And even the Pope and the Patriarch would say that it isn't. Why? Because the schism is something in which 1054 was a contributing incident, but you can't boil the schism down to that event, you see. Oh, I would almost rather deal with that in the subsequent weeks when we have to talk about all this reunion attempts, because I think it is accurate to say the only thing you could say that all Orthodox would agree regarding the Bishop of Rome is that he's not the Orthodox Bishop of Rome anymore. All the Orthodox would agree on that. But they perhaps would not agree on many other things. And what they would not agree concerns not only the Bishop of Rome, but the nature of the Roman Catholic Church, and you can even, that's why it's a very much wider question. To what extent are those bodies outside the communion of the Church still Christian? You will find those Orthodox who will claim that there is no grace outside the visible Church at all. Most Orthodox Christians have run into a few who have that approach. It's safe to say, are a minority, numerically, though they sometimes speak very loudly. The majority of Orthodox Christians would say that to the extent that the Church's life exists imperfectly outside the church, one can see some sort of presence of the tradition that is of the church in part there. But how much and to what extent is a very slippery thing. Those who, now here we're getting, I like to avoid as far as possible statements of opinion, but I don't know if I can this time. It seems to me that the extremist position, and we're going to see extremist positions on both sides, both Greek and Latin, the extremist position comes at least partly from a mindset that insists on having precise and exact definitions of everything. We have to know exactly where the grace of God is and to what extent and where it isn't. And we cannot endure living with any sort of ambiguity in this matter. So with that understanding, the next step is to say, therefore, since God has given his grace to the church, we will conclude that outside the church there isn't any. It's very convenient. I don't think it works. It's God and the things of God are not so easily described and defined as that, I don't think. But the answer is not the other extreme and to say, well, we don't know anything at all. It's always the middle way, and the middle way is always the most difficult way. But we'll say a lot more about that. I would accept, I think, as most accurate that the schism between East and West took place over a period of several centuries. That's why last time we started with, Charlemagne and the controversy with the Patriarch Photius and the beginnings of the use of the filioque. From the beginnings of the 9th century until the Council of Florence in the 15th century. By the time of the Council of Florence, we can certainly say that the division is clear. In between that time, there are any number of incidents that widen the schism and some attempts to heal it. But far worse, we'll get to it perhaps next time, far worse as a widening influence than 1054 is going to be the result of the Crusades. But we'll talk about the Crusades next time. Mm-hmm. It happens in the same way that any sacrament happens. The sacraments of the church happen through the working of the Holy Spirit through human means. Ideally, those means are worthy. But if they're not worthy, the grace is not withdrawn. The grace, otherwise, if we take the other position, let's apply it to the Eucharist. See, then we would say that St. Simeon Theologian actually addresses this. What does the unworthy communicant receive? What does a person who is in an unrepentant state of grave sin, yet still presumes to receive Holy Communion, what does he receive? The answer of the church is he receives what everybody else receives. Because the Eucharist is the Eucharist by virtue of what God has made it to be, not by virtue of the recipient. It damns you instead of saves you. It poisons you instead of heals you. That's what happens. The same thing with ordination. The one who is ordained, unless it is a person who has what's called a canonical impediment to ordination. But a canonical impediment to ordination is not being a person who has obtained the office through immoral means. Because a person who, if you're a person who buys an ecclesiastical office, if he is still, a male candidate that's ordainable, is ordained. And what that ordination will do to him will depend on his own life. But nevertheless, what is it that he has received? He's received the apostolic laying on of hands. Does that help? Well, there are many who say that. I would not want to use the word impossible, though I guess I would personally agree with you. It seems impossible. I'd say unlikely. With God, all things are possible. And to the extent that God wishes all to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth, and because we believe that the true faith, despite all the sins of people inside the church and outside the church, remains in this world, that it is always possible for those who have either, in this case, added to, or later on we talk about the Reformation, primarily taking from, the deposit of faith, it is possible for them to come to the knowledge of the truth, because it's possible for everyone. But I sometimes think that it's going to take the return of the Lord Himself to straighten up the mess. That's what I think. Because there not only schism between Orthodox and Roman Catholics, but I sometimes, this is really a little rabbit trail if you want, but I sometimes, I'm taking a walk and look at the prosperous appearing building of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I cannot help but saying, but asking God, and it's sort of in the language of the Scripture, why do you permit this? What is going to make this stop? And I can't think of anything in this world that will. Especially in America. Wait till we talk about the unique American religious tendency, which seems to be that Americans in 200 years have tried to refrain from the bizarre in every aspect of life except religion. In areas of religion, they have multiplied more bizarre expressions of religion than anybody else ever. There's a book, I forget who the author is, it's got Only, I mean, in 200 years of American religious history, what do we have? We have the Mormons, we have the Christian Scientists, we have the various Adventist groups, although they're not in quite the same category as the others. Nevertheless, they're still quite strange. We have the Jehovah's Witnesses, even though they didn't start here. This was the only place they could flourish. We have the Shakers. The same thing. Didn't start here, started in England, but they didn't take root there. They took root here. And you know, people admire them. They admire the way they lived, their community life, their music, their hard work. But the Shakers of the last century were extreme heretics of the Bogomil Paulician Gnostic type. I don't know. Is that it? But God is in heaven, and He does rule His church. I mean, we've got to say that in the midst of all this. We do not see what will be in the end. We only see from underneath. And there is more to the church than what's underneath. If all there was is that, we wouldn't be here now, because it would have long ago died. Okay, till next time. God bless us.